You have questions, we have answers. This is Jane Muller.
And this is Ken Muller. Welcome to our show, all about real estate with Ken and Jane. And today, Jane, we're going to recap what we covered the last show. We were talking about it from the buyer perspective. All this time we've been talking about the seller side, so we started delving into, from the buyer perspective, what's involved in the whole process of winning the bid and all the competitiveness of being that it is a seller's market. So just to recap for the listeners that didn't catch the last show, we covered the buyer offer process and the strategies to help the buyer be successful in this highly competitive seller's market. And among that discussion was that how important it is for the buyer to have all their ducks in a row. So that entails basically having having a solid contract with the buyer attorney, buyer loan officer picked out. If there's a large down payment of funds or an appraisal contingency waiver, it's important also to have the buyer's proof of funds to show that they're in the financial position not only to cover the down payment, the closing costs, as well as a waiver of the appraisal contingency if that push comes to shove.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress any more importance here, right? We receive so many offers. The buyer willing to waive the appraisal contingency, but with what? 5% down. How can you waive it? So, they may have 401k, but give us the statement. A lot of time, right? And then I do have other buyers and say how successful they are. I think that at the end of the day, to let a seller know you're very successful is a great thing. I mean, we're happy for you. But most importantly, give the bank statement to show the strength, right? God forbid, and if the appraisal didn't come to fruition to the contract price, at least the seller understood you have a financially ability to close the house. So that's, the documentation. Once again, go back to homework. The documentation is very important.
Right. And then we touched upon how as a bonus, in addition to all the things that we just discussed, the buyer could also, what's very proactive would be if the buyer includes an attorney review letter already, which would be highly proactive. But that has
I only had it once, but I have to say, because that was a very creative way in this competitive market, and the buyer won the house. That was really very, very decide point for the seller. There's no comparison. The seller didn't even think twice.
Right. And the reason I think that the buyer attorney review letter is very important is because then the seller knows that there's no surprises. Not oftentimes, but sometimes a contract can be prepared, the realtor contract of sale can be prepared with certain, waivers, like an appraisal contingency waiver. And then it's seldom, but it does happen that the buyer attorney just vehemently objects to whatever was previously agreed to between the parties. And that has happened where the buyer attorney will just say, nope, I don't care that it's in the realtor contract. I'm not gonna allow my client to waive the appraisal contingency. If it doesn't appraise, we want to have the right to renegotiate it. But by having the buyer attorney review letter up front, the seller can see with assurance what the proposed changes are.
Yeah, I mean, whatever they offered is actually what's going to go through the process. But I have to say for this, right, I have to think from today's session is about buyer. I think the benefit to the buyer too, think about it, Ken. If you make an offer as a buyer agent or buyer, right? And then the seller accepted and take you 3 days to find an attorney and then take a time. I know you're going to discuss more of attorney review and then write a letter. In the meantime, other buyer can come back and offer much competitive offer. Seller can cancel you, go with another contract. In this way, the benefit to the buyer is you shorten the process. So basically, once the owner accepts your offer, the contract along with your the attorney review letter go to the both attorney. So the seller attorney saw the contract the same times already review the letter. So only that deal I think only take 1 day to get a review because we give the contract to the seller attorney in the morning. He responded by noon, not only review plus respond to that, and then in the afternoon the buyer attorney just came back, signed it off. So typically, that date was, I couldn't believe it, less than 8 hours.
It was quite
done.
fast.
Yeah. And then the other agent did come back. The other agent didn't come back, say, hey, we lost the bid, but we're going to go much higher, but it's too late. It's out of review. So that shows how much these tools can protect buyers' best interest in this competitive sellers market.
Right.
Yes.
So let's delve into that a little bit more. Let's say the buyer's offer is accepted. We have this then provision that was a settlement based on that allows realtors basically to prepare the realtor contract of sale. That was a settlement reached between the realtor board, as they were known back then, and the attorneys, because basically the attorneys challenged the realtor's right, and they came to a settlement, and the Supreme Court basically came up with certain regulations. One of which is basically any realtor contract has to have in bold, which it does, the opinion 26, with the bold language stating that this contract will become binding within 3 business days. But in that time, you have the right for an attorney to review and disapprove of it. So that's critical. It has to be in any realtor-prepared contract language.
And very often, both seller and buyer may get confused, right? How the 3-day count. So would you like to give more explanation?
So let's give an explanation, but let's also give an example. So the 3 days, the 3-day attorney review period is 3 business days after both the buyer and the seller have received the fully signed contract. Not the brokers, not the buyer or the seller's sister or brother, but the buyer and the seller have to have received it, and it doesn't count the date of receipt. So let's do an example. Let's say the buyer writes an offer. I'm the buyer agent. I send you an offer on Thursday.
Yeah.
You get it signed by your client. No, let's say Friday. You don't get it back to me till Monday, and I give it to my buyer Monday afternoon. So under that scenario, the attorney review period would give 3 business days, assuming Tuesday's not a holiday. It would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They have till the end of Thursday to start attorney review. Either the buyer attorney or the seller attorney would have to send out an attorney review letter. Otherwise, the contract would be binding. Then you can get into, well, when does attorney review end on Thursday? And there's really been is it 5 p.m.? Is it the end of the business day? Well, that really hasn't been ever decided by the courts.
Yeah,
it's kind of,
I think
so. It's really the conception is it's really till midnight of Thursday. The end. There've been some cases where attorneys have sent review letters the 3rd day after 5 p.m. and they've been determined to be okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of time, right, as an agent ourselves, right, we always have to be eyes on the ball. We are the project manager. We always have to call and, to inform the client. I mean, as a good buyer agent, I believe in my personal experience, right, I always ask buyer to have a attorney selected before we actually have a contract. Why is that? You have to do your homework, right? You're gonna buy a house. It costs you $0 to find a lawyer. Why not take the time to talk to a few lawyers and see? And some corporations have the legal plan. So they give you a list and you go through and select one. So you get it ready. So when you actually had a contract, if you do nothing, which is a lot of people don't understand, 3 days, if they did nothing, that means you bought this house under the pre-printed New Jersey Real Estate Association contract, right? So that's very important. It's not like I change my mind, I hide, I do nothing, which has happened to us once, right? And we represent the seller, the buyer made an offer, accepted it, give it to them, and then the buyer got a cold feet or not, and they just not responding to the buyer agent. So when that happened, at the end, I have to get involved and try to contact and the buyer agent said, well, they don't contact. I said, do you mind? Because as your client, I don't want to get involved, right? But please, you have to ask your broker or someone from your firm to call the buyer to inform them. They have to, and the legally, the agent or the buyer cannot cancel the contract once contract signed. I had another scenario where under attorney review, and then the buyer tried to call us because their agent on vacation. So they try to call us as a leasing agent and say, hey, I want to change my down payment. Can you write a new contract? Answer is no. I want to change this. I want to change. I want to, normally the price already set. I want to change the down payment lower, or I want to change the closing date. You have to speak to your lawyer. the agent, even your, I mean, I'm the seller agent, obviously, no, but even your own agent here, not on vacation, the agent cannot make any changes. Once the contract signed by both parties is done, it's go to the lawyer. That's the legal process
That's
start.
Right. That's absolutely right. Yep. That's a very good point. Only the attorney can disapprove of the contract and make changes at that point. So that's why it's important to have your attorney selected and make sure you really want them to put an offer in, because once it's fully signed and attorney review starts, you have to engage an attorney to disapprove or cancel the contract.
Yeah. Another thing is, common question is, how long the attorney review last? I mean, I represent a buyer long time ago, 12 years ago. Our attorney and the seller attorney somehow had a disagreement on something. So on HOA or something. Nobody backed down. So, but my buyer really want the house. And the seller the agent really want to work with us and sell the house. So, but the lawyer wouldn't conclude the review unless they got something from the HOA. The HOA not responding. You know how slow the HOA is not responding. They said, nobody asked that, we're not giving to you. So in the meantime, we stuck really with the attorney review. But luckily, that was in the lower market, like 2011, 2012, not really beating war, so we are good that way. So I convinced the buyer and said, hey, let's move forward with the process because we can't solve the attorney issue. We continue to do the mortgage application, the home inspection, everything. So at the end, we never ever got off the review, believe it. I was like crazy. We closed. We never went under contract. We just in attorney review. Until we closed that day, we closed the deal.
Wow.
That's like a lifetime experience.
Yeah. And that's something also, it's also based on the market. A lot of times, years ago, when it was more buyer's market, a lot of buyer's attorneys would put in their review letters that the attorney review is contingent upon review of if it was an association, they'd want to review the bylaws and the financial documents and keep attorney review open.
Yes.
Now, oftentimes the seller attorney would reject that because they didn't want it to drag on, but certainly a proposed clause like that in today's market would get a lot more resistance from the seller side because they wouldn't want to drag it, and it's almost like the buyer would have to concede that either get the bylaws or they don't have that much flexibility to drag the purchase contingent upon review of the bylaws.
I have to say to you, Ken, I have to confess, that transaction was early on in my career.
Yeah.
So I basically in the mercy of the attorney and the buyer, because today obviously you can't practice law because I'm not qualified, not like you're attorney, trade, but I'm not, I'm an agent. But at least I can guide my client better. Saying, why don't you call the association? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? At least I can make some alternative recommendation. But that time, I was really not experienced as today. So at the end, we just have to work with the system until we close. So, yeah.
All right, all good stuff. Why don't we take a short break, and we'll be right back after these messages. Okay, welcome back. We're going to continue to discuss the buyer process and the whole transaction. So let's go to the point now where the buyer's offer has been accepted. We're into attorney review. The buyer still has risk. It's not a binding contract yet, as we covered this multiple times. In attorney review, that's why it's so important for the buyer and their buyer attorney to get out of attorney review as soon as possible. Because they're vulnerable during that period, because in attorney review, they could be outbid by a higher offer, or as they say, in attorney review, either the buyer or the seller can cancel the contract for any reason or no reason. The buyer could change their mind and get another house, or the seller could get a higher offer and just tell their attorney to cancel, kill the deal.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can't say important enough for the buyer and the buyer attorney and a buyer agent, right? How many times at the end they, once again, my experience again, we had a contract done. Okay, and I represent buyer once again. It was a long time ago, and the couple, after we received the contract that night, the couple went out to celebrate, had a dinner, and they text me, say, Jane, we had a celebration. I said, no, it's too early. Let's get out the attorney review. But once again, they hired attorney. The attorney was in the office, and they sent a letter. We'll review later, but dragged it for a few days, and then we lost the house. So that's another thing I want to share here, right? Which is can be heartbreaking for a lot of buyers. I had cases when the listing agent called Final and Best. You already won. Not every seller stick with that decision. I know it's not fair
right.
to the buyer, but I got beat out once. We in the Final and Best, we won, and later on somebody knew we in attorney review because we won already. So obviously they went crazy. So in that case, the seller agent even didn't give us a chance because the gap was so big. It was like almost 20,000. So they didn't even get back to us. They just sent us a cancellation letter, which is I was stunned. So normally you get a courtesy, but the seller agent don't have to.
Right. That's a very tricky situation with Final and Best because it can also work a lot of times too. You call Final and Best by a certain date and a certain time, and then thereafter the seller agent will receive an offer of maybe 5 hours or an hour later,
or a day later.
But as the agent from the seller side, you have to present that offer to the seller and their attorney, and it's not up to the list agent to say, well, to cut them off and say, sorry, I can't accept your offer. Final and Best was already past due. Yeah. You don't want to get yourself into that, making that decision legally.
You can't.
Right. So you have to present it to the seller, and at that point, the seller's attorney let them sort it out. But that's I think the job of the seller. The seller agent is to present all written offers, must be presented during attorney review to the seller. And then even after attorney review, once you have a binding contract, if you receive a written offer, it has to be presented to the seller and their attorney. And in that case, it will serve as a backup offer. That's how.
The giving this session is focused on buyer. So as a buyer, if you see a house, you call your agent said call and says under contract, right? If you want to make an offer, you still can. But you will be backup offer. The seller may not allow you to go in the house to see the house because of the market, but if you know the house before, say I had a case, right? The buyer made an offer, and then the buyer saw the house during the open house, and then they beat on another house. They got it. And then a few days later, they had a home inspection or some issues, so they canceled. And when they come back to us, we're already under contract. So in that time, the agent called me, say, Jane, if there's anything happened, can you please? I told her, put in writing. Don't in word, right? Because I can't pass your word on.
Right.
So they send a formal backup offer. So the offer with the owner and the lawyer. So we always forward. But in that case, it helped the buyer situation. Why? Because later on, we had an issue because the buyer had some issue with, our buyer had an issue with his end with either the job or something, have second thought. We were able to contact this agent and say, hey, you're the backup, so thank you for follow up with me. Almost weekly, that agent texts me, is everything good? Is everything good? I said, there may be a crack here, I'm not sure, but as soon as that contract canceled, within hours, seller just accepted, we go into review, and they bought a house. So a lot of time, right, you still can make an offer, but the seller may not let you in the house because but if you see the house before, or the neighborhood very well, you're more than welcome to make an offer. But make sure, follow up with your agent, let your agent follow up with the listing agent. Because when you made an offer, could be 3 weeks later the deal didn't work out. So it only take a second. Good agent, that's our job, right?
And you just gave an example where it actually happened.
Take a second. Text and say, hey, Jane, hope all's well. How's the deal going? Any chance for my buyer? My buyer really want the house. Take you a minute. So I said, oh yeah, we're still going good, but one day not, and then I will respond. So yeah.
Right, but just keep in the loop and keep them thinking about your interest in it. Absolutely.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then what happens is once we get to attorney review is typically the buyer and the seller attorney will make modifications to the proposed contract. They'll either issue an addendum or an attorney review letter outlining the paragraphs, and then their correspondence will go back and forth until both sides agree on the proposed modifications. Then usually the buyer and the seller would sign off on it, or if not the buyer and the seller themselves, then the attorneys, if they have the express written authority under a case, the buyer lawyer and likewise the seller lawyer can sign off for their clients, but they have to have the express written, they're supposed to have the express written authority to do that.
Absolutely. After the under contract, the buyer should move forward with the process to get a home inspection done.
Well, wait, let's go back. So basically once that happens, once the attorneys sign off on it, then you're under contract. That's
Yes.
what under contract means. You're out of attorney review. It's the contract's,
It's binding.
It's binding. The
Yeah.
buyer, we're talking about from the buyer perspective, the buyer still has rights under the contract that if they're not happy with, they can still get out of the contract if they have a valid reason, like if they don't get the mortgage, if they're dissatisfied with the home inspection results and their actual defects and the seller doesn't want to fix them, or the property doesn't appraise. If they have an appraisal contingency, then those are some of the major reasons where the buyer can get out of the contract.
It's once again, right, after that, all the home inspection and appraisal, all the process is based on the attorney review letter, because the contract's based pre-printed form, right? And some attorney more detailed, they specify how many days. Normally we'll have 14 days or 10 days after conclude review, you can do a home inspection. But some detailed lawyer will put in there, after that, how many days you have to respond. So be careful of that, because I do have a case, the seller attorney is very detailed, said after you receive such a report, how many days you have to let us know, right? I think at the end, how many days after the home inspection have let us know, I think the home inspection report came late or something. So at the end, I have to talk to the seller, say, hey, be reasonable. I know they're late for the 2 days, but it's just not fair. Turn around and say that you lose your rights.
And
right?
oftentimes what the attorneys do, it could be the buyer or the seller attorney, oftentimes they put in their attorney review letters, one of the provisions is there's no automatic waivers. So that what that kind of says is basically, even if we exceed the time frame for the mortgage, having the mortgage agreement letter or the home inspection due date, you can't just say, I got you, and they have to give them a warning, a written notice.
Yeah.
So a lot of times that's how they protect
some
them.
didn't do it. I mean, so it really depends on once again, go back to that, is how you choose your lawyer. The lawyer is more like a doctor, in my opinion, right? Everybody have their specialty. If you have a headache, you're not going to say eye doctor. I mean, maybe you do, but you're not going to say hand doctor, right? So they are doctors. Though I'm these, but different specialize in different area. So with attorney, some attorney do a lot of insurance. Some may do a lot of estate planning or something. But injury, for example. But you should really interview and hire attorneys specialized in real estate transactions. So Absolutely. They are more pro. So they're more experienced. I mean, just like us, right? Anytime if something happens, you learn something. So what the lawyer does, he or she will put in the attorney review, add one more line. Because sometimes I read the letters like, why is that? So and then they must have an issue about that.
Right.
So
that goes. So even though we're jumping the road, that might go. A lot of times, attorney review letters address the broom clean condition at closing and no debris left curbside, because they must have had the experience where a lot of times the house was in broom clean condition. However, there was a couple of huge piles of garbage left on the curbside, and then furniture and whatever miscellaneous debris, and then the buyer saying and their agent are saying, oh, we went to the walkthrough, but this really isn't good, because how the heck do we know the township is going to pick this up, and what are we going to do if we have to get stuck with it and we have to pay a few $100 to get rid of it? So that's why you try to through experiences, you try to further clarify the review letters so you can kind of address any unanticipated events. Try to have a resolution, but there's always something new that comes up. But again, you're constantly improving your review letters to address what.
Absolutely. As a buyer, how often do we buy a house, right? So it's really to hire a good experienced agent. They can guide you, and also hire a good lawyer to guide you. So they are professional. So they will help you to navigate through the process, because for the lawyer and the experienced agent, that's our daily life. So we do it all the time. So we know, right? Just like my mom cooking. I mean, she doesn't need a recipe. She doesn't go shopping. She just open the fridge, say whatever there, she can make beautiful food. But for the beginner like me, I have to search for the recipe.
For me, I'd have to search for the cookbook. Then I have to search for the measuring devices and have step-by-step instructions. How much?
And you still can't make it.
Probably not. I probably still couldn't make it as good as your mom. That's for sure.
My mom, forget it. You can't make as good as our daughter.
Wow, That's true. Maybe not
Yeah.
the dog could make it better.
Yeah, I think so
Probably
too. Yeah.
So let's talk now from a buyer agent's role. You're under contract.
Mm-hmm.
You're the buyer agent. You've now got to get your client arranged to have them go for the home inspection.
Yes, and home inspection is very important. Once again, if anyone would like to hear more, we did have a session with a home inspector a few weeks ago, and they have a detailed about the home inspection. Yeah.
Okay, and unfortunately we're out of time for this show, so we're going to have to take that up the next show. And hope everyone stay tuned. Next time we're going to talk about the home inspection.
Time fly fast. Okay, have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.